The Rebbe of Berdichev was famous even among tzaddikim for his incredible love of his fellow Jew. And what does it mean to be really loving? What does it mean to really love someone? Well, one of the definitions, one of the expressions that love takes is that when you love someone, you cannot, don't want to, and cannot see faults in the person you love. The Berdichever saw a Jew who was still wearing his talit and his tefillin and had gone out of the shul, out of the synagogue, and was greasing the wheels of his wagon. Others would have said, blasphemy. In the middle of the prayer, couldn't wait another 10 minutes while wearing talis and tefillin? You're greasing your wheels? The Berdichever saw this, and his immediate reaction, his natural, instant reaction was, Jews are incredible. In the middle of their work, while greasing their axles, they never forget to say their prayers. He could see only the positive. When on a Tisha B'Av, he saw a man eating, he said to him, "Oh, did you forget that it's Tisha B'Av today?" The man said, "No." The Berdichever said, "Did the doctor tell you that you couldn't fast because of your health?" The man says, "No." He said, "Were you feeling dizzy or weak that you decided to eat on your own?" He says, "No." The Berdichever walked away saying, Jews are such good people. Even when caught red-handed, they don't lie. They admit their sin. So whatever virtue there was, he picked up on it and refused to see the negative. A young man came to the Berdichever for private audience. Now, when a person sins and violates one of the commandments, there's a process by which we repent, we do tshuva. Rambam describes this at great length in the laws of tshuva. But basically, tshuva means you regret the sin, you resolve never to do it again, and that resolution, that resolve, is a sincere one and a strong one, and you've removed the tendency to commit that sin. You've removed that from your mind and heart, and you've banished it from your thoughts. That's tshuva. When you do that, God guarantees us in the Torah that your sin is forgiven, erased, will never be brought up, will never be mentioned. Not a word, not a half a word. To quote from the Torah. However, being forgiven, being absolved, is not the same as being cleansed. Person commits a sin, he's actually doing two things, two violations. Number one, he's transgressing. God said, "It is not my will that you do this. It is my will that you refuse or refrain from doing this." And the person went ahead and did it anyway. So there's a violation of God's will. There's a transgression there of doing what should not be done. That needs to be forgiven. But every sin carries with it a certain unholiness, a certain spiritual corruption. Even if you're forgiven, that blemish, that uncleanliness, is not removed, is not undone by the forgiveness. And so in addition to tshuva, in addition to repentance and gaining forgiveness, there's also a process by which we rectify, cleanse, and fix the damage caused by the sin. Now, to know how to do this, to know how to correct the sin, you have to be a very saintly person. You have to be outside the arena of sin so that you know how to reach in there and undo it and correct it. But anybody who lives within the arena of sin, anyone who is capable of sinning themselves, is not capable of rectifying or tikkun of a sin. And so this young man came to the Berditchever, who was his rebbe, to ask for instruction on how to rectify, how to do a tikkun for a sin for which he had already repented. And he tells the Berditchever that he had spent some time with a woman alone, and they had gotten involved with each other, and they had sinned. However, it seems that this man wanted to make it sound a little better, a little nicer, and he said, "But Rebbe, we waited until she went to the mikveh." Which means that there's a ritual immersion that a married woman does before she has relations with her husband, which makes the relationship holy and sanctified and prepares them for childbirth and so on. So there is a prohibition in Torah about having relations with a woman who had not gone to the mikveh. And so the man said, "We did sin, but we didn't violate the laws of mikveh. We waited until she went to the mikveh." And so it made it sound like the sin was not as terrible, or at least there was only one sin, but not a double sin of also not having gone to the mikveh. To his surprise, to the young man's surprise, the Berditchever, when he heard that, got really upset. And he rose up out of his chair. And he said, 7 days you waited to sin? I can't help you. Get out of my room. The man was not only surprised, he was shocked. For the Berditchever to throw someone out of his room, it was unthinkable, unheard of. In order to go to the mikveh, a woman counts 7 days. And on the 7th day, on the 7th evening, she goes to the mikveh. The Berditchever's reaction was, "You waited 7 days to sin? I can't help you." The meaning of that is, we all know that there's a difference between a premeditated sin, a premeditated crime, and a crime of passion. A crime of passion means that in the moment of passion, you lose control of your senses, of your behavior, and you do things that you regret, you do things that you did not intend to do. It was the passion of the moment, a moment of weakness, that you slipped up and you did something you weren't supposed to do. That's called a crime of passion. That's called a crime of temptation, a sin of temptation. The temptation happened to be strong and you failed. But that can't last 7 days. You can't have a crime of passion lasting an entire week. A crime of passion is a momentary thing. When the Berditchever heard that they had waited 7 days in order for her to go to the mikveh so that they could sin of having relations outside of marriage, he said, during those 7 days, you intended and planned and premeditated a sin, and during those entire 7 days, your mind could not regain control of your passion? This is not a crime of passion. This is true corruption. I can't help you. So if the man hadn't said that, if the man hadn't in fact waited 7 days, and they had in fact committed not only the sin of relations outside of marriage, but also of not having gone to the mikveh, although it would have been a greater sin, but he would have been less culpable, because it could be attributed to a moment of weakness, to a moment of passion. But having waited 7 days, that puts the whole thing into a different perspective. That puts it into a whole different category. This is not an act of passion. This is premeditated. In fact, 7 days premeditated. And this, the Berditchever says, I can't help you. Well, the young man was truly shaken. Was he really that bad? Can anyone be so bad that the Berditchever Rebbe couldn't find anything positive to say and couldn't help you out and actually threw you out of the room? In desperation, he made a trip to Lubavitch, to Ladi, and he came to Lozhna, and he came to where the Alter Rebbe was, and he presented his problem to the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe listened, and then prescribed for him the method by which he can rectify his sin. A certain amount of learning, a certain amount of charity, a certain amount of prayer. When he came back to Berditchev, he went to his Rebbe, to the Berditchev Rebbe, and he asked the following question. He said, why is it that when I came to you, you got so upset that you threw me out? And when I went to your mechutin, when I went to your family, to the Alter Rebbe, he didn't get so upset and he didn't throw me out. He told me what to do, and I'm doing it. And the Berditchever said, my mechutin, he has broad shoulders. He can handle it. I can't. And what he meant by that was, there is a certain amount of corruption or of unholiness that the heart is vulnerable to. The emotions. We can love in an unholy way. We can hate, certainly, in an unholy way. We can even have compassion in an unholy way. The heart is easily corruptible. Although love is a good thing, it can be abused. Although compassion is certainly a good thing, it can be abused. And even anger could be moral indignation, or it can be simply ugly temper. These emotions, which are the basic emotions, are easily corrupted. To fix them, you have to introduce into that same heart, the same heart that experienced the unholy emotion, you have to now introduce holiness, holy feelings, holy sensation and pleasure that will replace or displace the unholiness that brought to the unholy behavior. When the man came to the Berditchever and said, I have sinned, the Berditchever assumed that it was an act of passion, which means a corruption in the emotions. Emotions the Berditchever knew how to fix, because the Berditchever served God with his heart, with his emotions. And anything relating to the heart, the Berditchever could rectify, could correct, could elevate, could refine, could cleanse. The heart, that was his domain. But when the man said to him, we waited 7 days so that she could go to the mikveh, so that we wouldn't be violating 2 commandments, here the Berditchever had nothing to offer. He couldn't help him. This is not your heart that is sinning, this is your mind. Your mind premeditated, coldly calculated a plan to sin. And in 7 days never changed its mind, continued with the plan. Which means that the corruption is not in the heart. The corruption is in the head. The corruption is in the brain. The corruption is in your thinking. And this, the Berditchever said, I don't know how to fix that. When the young man came to the Alter Rebbe, whose approach to godliness and the service of God is to serve God through Chabad, through the mind, through wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, to the Alter Rebbe, corruption of the mind was not beyond repair, and it was not beyond hope. And so he simply gave him a method by which he could rectify, elevate, purify his thinking, his understanding, his mind's workings. And this is what the Berditchever meant when he said the Alter Rebbe has broad shoulders. shoulders generally indicate emotions because the mind is objective, like the head or the brain. It sits in the middle, which is objective. The shoulders branch off from the head, from the neck, to the right and to the left. And that indicates emotional reaction to a known subject. It branches off to the right. That means a positive reaction, an attraction, a love. It branches off to the left. That's a negative reaction. That's a rejection, a judgment, a hate, a critical rejection. Those are the emotions. So the shoulders represent the emotions. Broad shoulders means shoulders nurtured by intellect. Emotions fortified by understanding and by knowledge. So intellect bringing its influence to the emotions, that's called broad shoulders. The Berditchever said, my Mechutin, the Alter Rebbe, he has a method by which he can rectify not only the emotion, but also the thoughts, the mind, the brain behind the emotion. And that was recorded, that was captured by the Alter Rebbe in his classical work of Tanya. And there the Alter Rebbe explains how we not only need to be virtuous, need to be good, need to obey the commandments and not disobey. Not only are we to be right rather than wrong, not only are we to be stronger than our weaknesses, not only do we fight our Yetzer Hara by being stubborn, but we actually get ahead of the Yetzer Hara and stay a step ahead of our evil inclination by simply being smarter than our weaknesses, not only stronger. Being smarter than our weaknesses means having an approach to godliness that is intelligent, that is bright, that is clear, that illuminates the mind, so that it is logically compelling, so that we can use the mind to govern and control and guide the emotions so that we have the right feelings, which don't leave much room for the wrong feelings. When the mind governs our love, then the love is always correct, then the love is always proper, and there isn't much room for its corruption or for its abuse. And certainly with anger or judgment, where the mind is involved, the judgment will be useful, productive, constructive. Without the mind being present in the emotion, judgment and hate, of course, very quickly become negative, destructive, and cruel. So the difference between the Alter Rebbe and the Berditchever Rebbe is that the Berditchever Rebbe approached the service of God directly with the heart, straight to the heart. The heart was inspired, the heart had all the right feelings, then there was no room or even time for the negative feelings, for the corrupt feelings. The Alter Rebbe introduced the idea that you can't go straight to the heart, bypassing the mind, because that kind of inspiration may not last. Well, of course, unless you're a tzaddik, like the Berditchever. But in order to make good emotions last, in order to make inspiring feelings permanent, a permanent fixture in your personality, you have to go through the mind to get to the heart. So, for example, the Berditchever loved to perform miracles, like the Baal Shem Tov. At any opportunity, wherever possible, perform a miracle. It inspires people. It lifts them up out of their depression, out of their negative thinking, out of their pessimism, out of their fatalism. They see a miracle and they realize everything is possible. Things can be good. Things will be good. And they're back on their feet. At the wedding, where the Barditchever's grandchild was marrying the Alter Rebbe's grandchild. The Barditchever wanted to perform miracles. On such an occasion, with so many people in attendance, what could be better? To inspire the people, it will be a wedding they'll never forget, and they'll come home enriched, they'll come home encouraged, it will be great. The Alter Rebbe said, that's not my style. In fact, the Alter Rebbe often said that although he is a disciple of the Baal Shem Tov and is loyal to every nuance of the Baal Shem Tov's teachings, yet there's a difference between himself and the Baal Shem Tov in that he, the Alter Rebbe, does not perform miracles the way the Baal Shem Tov did. Well, there was a woman whose husband had disappeared. No trace, no sign, no news. And this had been a long time. And she couldn't, of course, remarry because she was married. And on the other hand, her husband had disappeared. And very often the Alter Rebbe would be able to, or other tzaddikim, would be able to find a missing husband and then solve the problem for the abandoned woman, for the abandoned wife. Well, this woman came to Lozhne, where the Alter Rebbe was, with her 11-year-old son, and wanted to get the Rebbe's advice or blessing on how to find her husband. But it was a holiday season and things were very busy, and she wasn't given an appointment. So she went to the Rebbe's wife, to the Rebbitzin, and told her the problem. And the Rebbitzin advised her to do the following. Write your problem down on a little note. Give the note to your son, the little boy, who can squeeze his way through the crowd and get right up front to the Alter Rebbe, and hand the Alter Rebbe the note. The woman did this. She writes her problem down on a piece of paper, and she gives it to this 11-year-old boy, and tells him to crawl between people's feet and make his way up to the head table, and hand the note to the Alter Rebbe. The boy does this. He hands the note to the Rebbe. The Rebbe looks at the note and then says, tell your mother that her husband, your father, is in Leipzig. He mentioned the name of a city. The boy crawls back through the crowd and comes over to his mother and says, the Rebbe said that daddy is in Leipzig. And the mother almost fainted because this boy was a mute. He was autistic. He hadn't spoken a word in his life. And here he came right out and said, the Rebbe said that daddy is in Leipzig. Afterwards, one of the Chassidim, close to the Alter Rebbe, said that he heard this story and that he was surprised because the Alter Rebbe always insisted that he didn't perform miracles. To which the Alter Rebbe said, how was I supposed to know the boy was a mute? In other words, when the Rebbe said to him, go tell your mother, that created the miracle, but the Rebbe had no intention, was not conscious of the fact that he was doing something miraculous by telling the boy to speak. So the Alter Rebbe's style was not to perform miracles, even though miracles happened around him all the time. Whereas the Barditchever's style was performing miracles. What the reason, the philosophical background to this, is that the Barditchever served God with his heart. Miracles inspire the heart. It bypasses, it short circuits the brain and goes directly to the heart. A miracle does not inspire a brain. By its very definition, a miracle means unexplainable, miraculous event, which leaves the brain completely out of the picture because the brain always wants to be logical. And what can't be explained is not appealing to the brain. So a person seeing a miracle does not change his mind. His brain doesn't work any differently. He's not any smarter after a miracle. But he can be very inspired. The heart can be deeply moved by seeing a miracle. And the heart that had become callous, or a heart that had become dull, can come back to life as a result of a miracle. So the Berditchever, whose method of serving God was to go directly to the heart, would obviously, logically, approve of miracles, because miracles did the job in inspiring and warming the heart. The Alter Rebbe's approach was, you've got to serve God in a orderly and disciplined fashion, which means using the mind, involving the mind, including the mind in your service of God. And therefore the miracle, although it may be wonderful for the moment, and in an emergency can save a person from despair, but as a method, as a lifestyle, as an approach, a philosophy, the Alter Rebbe was not in favor of miracles. Because miracles do not educate. Miracles do not permeate into the thinking patterns and into the perceptions that a person has of himself and of life and of the purpose of life and so on. And so we know that in the beginning of our history, when the Jewish people saw miracle after miracle, in the 10 plagues during their stay in Egypt, the miracles that happened at the crossing of the sea, the miraculous events surrounding the revelation at Sinai and the giving of the Torah, they were so accustomed to miracles, they should have been the most inspired generation of all. And yet we see that the inspiration was short-lived. And every couple of months, every couple of years certainly, they had a change of mind and suddenly thought that maybe they should go back to Egypt, and maybe they don't need Moshe as their leader, and maybe God didn't mean what he said. The mind was not working as it should, even though miracles were happening all the time. So we see that a miracle, although it inspires, and although it shakes you out of your lethargy and makes you realize that there is a lot more to the world than we know and that we can control, that inspiration is good on occasion, like a spice added to a food. But the food itself, the substance of our approach and our relationship to God, has to include the mind. It has to include the wisdom, knowledge, and understanding.
Partner with Rabbi Friedman. Visit itsgoodtoknow.org/support.